So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Emily Wilson. I'm the Managing Director of FutureYou. FutureYou is a full-service talent management provider who work with our clients to develop strategies on how best to attract, retain, and develop their staff. We do that through our search, recruitment, and advisory offerings. So 4 years ago, we set up FutureYou with the sole purpose, the power to connect without limitation. So I'm super excited about the webinar that we've got this morning with Jono from the Wellbeing Outfit. And what I've learned about this business has impressed me through and through, in terms of me certainly understanding that in the market there are consultants who are focused on business strategy, and there are consultants who are focused on well-being, and then there are the Wellbeing Outfit who do both. And no one better to be the managing director and the founder of that business than Jono, who was the Australian finalist in 2018 for the Australian National Health Award, which is basically a 20-year service to the mental health industry, Jono. So no one more qualified than you in this space. And you know, you get to speak to a lot of different businesses through the work that you do as an executive consultant for EY as well. So firstly, thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your insights with us this morning. Just in terms of the plan, we have an hour together this morning. Jono will be talking through a couple of key slides, and then we're just going to do free-flowing Q&A, of which people have already reached out with those questions, Jono, and I have loads for you myself anyway. And then at some point today, we'll send out the video recording of this webinar and the slides that Jono has talked to. So we will definitely do that. So 2020 has been one heck of a year. You know, psychological trends coming out of this that we would have never seen before. And Jono will be discussing today the psychological trends that have come out of COVID-19 and are drastically changing the way that we are working and the way that we will continue to work. So Jono, over to you for some of those slides, please.
Yeah, sure. So thank you everybody for joining, and thank you Em and FutureYou for inviting me to be here. Just a little bit of in context of, and background about how I do, or how we do the work at the Wellbeing Outfit. So as Em shared, I had a 20+ year career with Reach Out, which is a web-based mental health service for young people and their parents. My story actually started, I lost a friend of mine to suicide when I was 14, and made a commitment at that age to dedicate my life and career to mental health and suicide prevention. Was very lucky when Reach Out was founded. That was the first digital mental health service in the world when it was founded in '97, and I was one of the starting staff members. And actually my work in this space really started when I served the last 10 years of my career at Reach Out as CEO. And the context that we really worked in was, in any given month, we'd have about 150,000 users from Australia, of whom 37,000 were suicidal teenagers. And our team would regularly need to make crisis referrals, get police involved in terms of suicidal teenagers. And so my kind of job was, how do I look after my people who are looking after the young people we serve? And my kind of big insight was, our mission was to help all young people be happy and well. And if we couldn't get that mission outside our own door, then kind of how were we going to help young people? So a lot of what I've now taken and partnered with clients on is really this idea that that by looking after and helping the cognitive performance of our people, we can best serve the mission of our organisations, which, to your point, Em, is really the insight that we've got about the link between wellbeing strategies and business strategy.
Yeah, and really resonates with me because, you know, if you are able to, you know, help understand, maintain, you know, the mental health of teams, then it will increase the performance of the business and then do a better job in terms of their mission to their customer base.
Absolutely. And what happened with COVID-19 is essentially this is a psychological crisis, certainly in Australia, right? Australia's had relatively low numbers, certainly it hasn't had the experiences in Europe, parts of Asia, the US and elsewhere. And so one of the things as leaders is it has actually meant mental health and business performance are really top of the agenda now for most business leaders, as they recognize that the performance of their people, the performance of the organization is really dependent on how well and how motivated and how engaged their people are. I think for those of you who've got businesses in Victoria, in particular with the extended lockdown, really experiencing what is the psychological impact of people having a lot of their civil liberties removed for very good reasons. How do we keep our people motivated? What does that mean in terms of our business operations and the sort of weight there? So I'll share my screen now, Em, and I'll talk to you about what I share with a lot of our clients around the big psychological trends coming out of COVID-19. For those who don't know, this is my boy Atticus, who loves Zoom bombing. He's unwell today, so we'll be joining.
Already, Atticus. Yeah. Hi. I just called in. Yeah.
So one of the things, just to put this in context, is COVID has really probably accelerated the biggest trend that we've got, which is a world where our external environment, the assumptions on which we build our business, change very rapidly. So the biggest trend that has happened, certainly if you've worked in the media sector, in other sectors, you would have seen your business models get upended because of a change in the external environment or a change in technology. That was really very narrow in the number of businesses that were impacted. What COVID has done is extend that right across the countries, right across the world. So I think a lot of the big psychological trends that we're seeing are accelerating previous trends rather than being a complete change. And the first one that we're seeing is that well-being is the pathway to high performance. So if you actually think about it, most of us kind of grew up and had our experiences in a time where the value of our workforce, and in fact the value of our identity as a worker, was about how hard we worked. And we documented that in time. So people would say I had a really long week, or I'm a really good employee because I work 50 plus hours, or I must be valuable because I'm always at work, or I'm really sorry I can't attend my kids' performances or do the things I want for my family because I have to work hard. So we just really had this kind of insight that essentially well-being was the thing that we were willing to sacrifice to be good at work. What's happening now is that in growing number of organizations are realizing that well-being is your pathway to high performance, not the cost of doing business. And the quicker that organizations shift, the quicker that they see and align their business strategies with their well-being strategies, the better they'll be able to adjust to these uncertain times. Because what we're seeing in this environment is very much this idea that we need our people to be motivated, quick to change, quick to adapt. They need to have faith in our leaders that we can navigate through some pretty stormy weather. And unless they feel good about themselves, unless they feel connected to their colleagues, they're simply not motivated enough to do that. So this is really the big shift that we're seeing in COVID that's extending right across businesses.
This one so resonates with me because, you know, recruitment and search and selection of people into organisations, even, you know, 5 years ago, was very much about their skills, their experience, their track record, and that was it. Where now, you know, the clients that we really enjoy working with, they use words like, what is the energy like of that individual? You know, what's their motivation? What do they do outside of work? You know, that's certainly the key to unlocking people's, you know, potential and enjoyment and talent. I mean, they've clearly got to have the right track record and the right experience so they can succeed in a role. But it's the well-being, which I think is linked to sort of energy and motivation, you know, that really determines, you know, how well people are going to do in their role and their team and so on.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, to your point, Em, that's now the differentiating factor.
Yes.
So what we're seeing in terms of the big underlying trends is that artificial intelligence and bots are being increasingly able to do repetitive cognitive tasks. So
Yes.
things that we would do through sort of cognitive brute force are going to be done far more efficiently in 24 hours a day through AI. And so what we'll start really valuing in even more and more in our workforce are the things that are not the repetitive cognitive tasks, the extent to which which someone can get along with others, the extent to which they can bring the most out of a team, the extent to which they can be creative and adaptable. These are things that AI is not good at, and these are the things that we'll really need in our workforce, and to do that, well-being is a cognitive prerequisite for that.
Yeah, excellent.
So that's the big thing. I would say if this feels intuitively right to people, I think the biggest gap that we see in organisations in relation to this is really two things. The first is most organisations see wellbeing as a welfare strategy. What do we need to do to look after our people and be resilient and recover from hard times? They don't see it as a competitive performance strategy. And because they see it largely as a welfare strategy, they're really missing a big opportunity, and the opportunity is to tie it to where you want your organisation to go. And that is then what happens because of that is we don't measure the work that we do in this space. We don't measure our improvements. And you think about this, if having a great supply chain is an important part of your business model, you wouldn't just delegate it, not talk about it at a leadership team meeting. You wouldn't not measure and not look at the suppliers. But this is essentially what we do quite often in the mental health and wellbeing space, because we think of it as not tied to our business performance when in fact it is.
And I certainly think that, organisations that I speak to, and even our own team, if the team or an individual is not performing to their best of their ability, it's not because they don't know how to do the task or they haven't got the experience or the background to do the task. It's because they're not feeling good for themselves, or they're going through a psychological struggle, which we all have this year. And it's the well-being of the individual that is whether they're going to be able to do their job well and do the job on behalf of their clients and customers.
Absolutely. And the other part to this that we certainly work with our clients on is that people's well-being and people's mental health, they really saw as an individual responsibility, which we tend to do is like, how do we give them individual skills? What we now know through the work around psychological safety is people's well-being at work and their ability to perform the task is largely driven by workplace factors. So the extent to which they can feel as if they can integrate their identity into work, and this is a place where they can be themselves, the extent to which they're connected and they like the people that they work with and they feel that they're trusted, and the extent to which they feel that this is a place where they can learn and grow. All of those are leadership strategies. So one of the things around well-being that we really help organizations through is understanding, particularly in the context of COVID-19, that if all you're doing is relying on individual or workshops like an Are You OK workshop, or you're giving people resilience and wellbeing skills, that's an important thing. People need to take some personal responsibility for this. But what you're leaving on the table is all the things that we know actually impact people's wellbeing at work and drive that high performance. And that really falls into what is our design of our organisation, and how is it designed in a particular way to support people's wellbeing? What are our leadership strategies? Do people have faith and confidence in our leaders? And what's our culture? What's our people strategy? So do they get along with others? So all of those are critical to how people experience the world, and therefore critical to their individual wellbeing and the organisation's wellbeing.
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest trend that we would see. There is a really big shift, but also a great opportunity as we come out of COVID-19 restrictions. And if you think about it, the big challenge here is that for many people and organisations, they see the sort of the end of COVID-19 restrictions as the end line, when really in a business context, what that will do is just shift it to an economic challenge, and therefore businesses that will survive and thrive through this will really see that as the starting line. And that's really our challenge now, is how do we keep our people motivated, engaged, supported and well through what is going to be an extended stress challenge, so that when those opportunities arise in the market, then we're able to take advantage of them. And relative to competitors who might have a really worn out staff who people aren't supported and engaged, then when those opportunities that are more rare come about, then we're ready to go.
When you first said that to me, that actually in people's minds, when the restrictions have lifted and there's a vaccine, they think that's the finishing line, and it's not. It's the start line. That hit me hard in terms of going, I'm one of those people But you're absolutely right. It's being able to understand how we need to, in your words, live our best life through COVID-19, which is going to be the end of 2020, 2021, 2022. You know, what the changed environment looks like is going to be constant. That's not going to go away. There's going to be constant change, constant challenges. So we have to gear ourselves up to be able to understand that and prepare for it.
Absolutely. So the way in which the vaccine is sort of framed in public conversation is kind of like the magical prince or princess who will save you and take you off to a magical world where all your problems will be solved, right? And what that has essentially done is externalized our control and said, oh, I can't do anything, I have to wait for a vaccine. The mindset shift that we really need for our organizations is firstly that the likelihood of a vaccine being developed, tested and released on scale in anywhere short of 2022 is very low, right? So it's not likely that it'll come and then immediately reach scale, but also that in and of itself will just start changing other business conditions. So to your point, Em, the mindset that we're now helping organizations through is see this as part of continuous change, and all the vaccine will do is change the business conditions yet again and change our personal conditions yet again. And if we're not ready for that, if we're exhausted or hoping that we don't really develop our organizations through COVID-19, then we're going to be really left on our heels when those opportunities emerge. And that will be probably, you know, if you look at it, as I said, it's probably at least one full financial year cycle before that's even at scale.
Which is why your work and your messaging is so important, because so many people are like, when is this going to be over? When is it going to be over? And they think it's going to be over when the restrictions go or the vaccine's here, but it's not. It's going to be continuing change and a new way of being and a new way of living and a new way of working that we need to make sure that we can be prepared for.
Absolutely. So that's our first big one. It's really about reframing how we think about well-being and putting a business strategy. And this is really tied to some of those points that we spoke about before, which is what I would call valuing grit over great, right? So one of the things that I often hear in workplaces is, you know, what's the best? How do we be the best? How do we, you know, be number one, right? And that's a really admirable strategy, but requires a lot of energy, right? If we're really just focusing on great and really kind of narrowing those opportunities. But what I would say is the mindset shift in terms of what we value in staff in this era of high change is we can be great under one set of business conditions, and then the business conditions change and then we go back to number 10, right? So one of the things that we need to start kind of really valuing and developing in our people is, what does good enough look like? Right? Are we good enough to solve the problem that we are? We may not be great at everything, but we're certainly good enough. And what goes into that is one of the other lessons, which is adaptability. And to be good enough and persistent across all things is really grit. It's really about effort and focus. And so I've got up here the Desert P. And if you look at that, the business environment that we're moving into is more likely a desert environment. And in a desert environment, what you find is the survival and thriving strategy is to bide your time. Really focus your energy and harness your strategy. And when the rain comes, when you have that opportunity to be great, you're ready to take advantage of it. But the rest of the time you focus on grit.
Totally.
And that's a big psychological difference than we can all be great all the time. It's really, we can't be great all the time. We have to be focused and disciplined. But if we're ready, we'll have opportunities to be great, and we need our people to take those opportunities.
Yeah. And I think that it's easy to be great when everything is easy. Like, we had a conversation where you were saying, you know, for leaders or CEOs in great economic times, you're a CEO of a bank producing, you know, billions of dollars worth of profit. You're not really having to do too much. It's more of the same, you know, it's a pretty easy road. It's when we're in a huge state of flux that the grit and determination comes in, because I believe that everyone can be great for a period of time if they really focus on it, if they're if they're in the right mindset, if they do all the right things. But to be able to perform well over a long period of time, it's absolutely the grit that has to kick in. You know, and people being able to find that, because maybe, you know, there's, and I don't think it's an age thing, but there's some people who have never suffered a crisis before, personally or at work, or who may not have had to discover if they've got grit or not, or have never had it challenged as much as they are at the moment. So it's definitely, you know, a key thing, and I think people are being exposed to how much grit they've got at the moment.
Absolutely. And what I would say is it's a psychological skill you can identify and you can nurture and you can teach. So we often think about, to your point, you know, that this generation of young people, anyone under the age of 30, hasn't known a world other than continuous economic growth in Australia. And they're now hitting a different world. That doesn't mean they're not resilient. It just means that they haven't been exposed to some of the strategies. But that's also true of business leaders, right? If you're a business leader in the last 30 years, you've only known a world in Australia of pretty well continuous economic growth. So a lot of businesses don't have grit either. So this is a really kind of about focus strategy. What do we need to do to help our people be persistent and focused, bide their time, keep themselves motivated, so that when the rain comes, and it won't necessarily always be a massive storm, it could be just a really localized rain, we're ready to take advantage of that relative to our competitors. And that's the strategy in highly changeable environments like the one that we find ourselves in. Because if you look at the vaccine, we don't know when the vaccine will be there. We do know that we need to be ready for change restrictions as they come. And we've seen that, you know, again, if you look at a business in Melbourne going through continuous changes in restrictions and permissions, being ready to go and keeping your people ready to go is a really important strategy.
Yeah, excellent.
And then the third one, and I'll stop here and maybe we can kind of open it up for, you know, other kind of questions and thoughts, is really building on from that, right? That what we need to value and nurture in our people is adaptability, not certainty, right? So one of the things about this environment, and we see this all the time, a lot of our business structures, organizational structures around certainty. So I was speaking and working with a CFO recently who couldn't provide market guidance and said for the first time in his career, he knows better where the business will be in 9 years than 9 months. And it was a real insight for him that as a financial controller, it was all about certainty and planning. There was regular times where you released information in the market and a whole range of things that we did that were building structures and predictability. But what we're now seeing in terms of adaptability is that we need to build what I would call tent poles, right? So we need to build the big markers that we think are right for our organization and business and our people to provide a roadmap to where we're going. But within those tent poles, we need to be ready to move very quickly. And what we know is that if people have low well-being, then when change happens, their instinctive reaction is to control and to restrict and be very resistant to that change. And that means as a business, you're spending a huge amount of your people energy on convincing people for the need to change, not how do we take advantage of that change. And so the idea of investing very much in adaptability of our people is recognizing that we're unlikely to have any degree of certainty about our environment for some time to come. But if our people are willing and excited to respond and be adaptable to that change, and that's a leadership strategy, then whatever the conditions are, whenever we see the rain, then we're ready to go. And that is a very different way to do organizational planning, strategic planning, people development, management. There's a whole range of things that really go into this idea of investing in adaptability, not certainty.
And I think this one is being tested the most as well as the others in terms of, because businesses are having to make fast, decisive decisions and adapt very quickly. You know, there are some people within businesses who are relishing that and can adapt and change and enjoy almost the blank sheet of paper and a fresh mindset. And then there are people that are completely resistant to it. It's not within their DNA or who they are. And, you know, you said that these traits can be taught, but the challenge I think that I see with organisations at the moment is they don't have time to teach them to be adaptable. It's either you've got to adapt today, and we've had to adapt the last, you know, 6 months, and we've got to continue to adapt, but the pace of adapting is way faster than the pace that you can teach someone to adapt. So it's either like you opt into the adapting or you don't. Like, what's the middle ground with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Emily. But what we find in this phase, and this has been my key criticism at the moment of political leaders, is that we're treating COVID-19 as a continuous crisis, not as a change. And in a crisis, you naturally lock down on a whole range of things. You become much more efficient about making incremental change, but you don't take a step back and start putting in some of the tent poles that will drive self-management and change over the long term. So you look at this at the moment around border restrictions and the definitions of a hotspot, right? That's a classic example where our political leaders have been managing the crisis on a day-to-day level, but haven't cognitively stepped back and said, actually, how do we enable a set of common definitions for certain things to happen by people without our permission, right? And so what has happened is, if you manage change and adaptability through crisis management, what you do is you bear a huge amount of cognitive weight on managing the next decision, and people just give up because their input's not resolved. What you need to do as a leader is get out of that crisis mode. You need to help start designing the long-term tent poles that enable people to adapt, and then you can start developing them. So they can't adapt if they don't have permission to participate. And a lot of what's happened, if you're managing this as a crisis, is you're not really inviting that participation. And I would say that's probably the biggest challenge now for organisations, certainly for our public leaders, is that they need the most senior leaders to step back from crisis management, from the day-to-day reporting, from all those things. They need to delegate those things, and they need to get on with the really important work of providing the guidelines that enable people to adapt within pretty reasonable decisions. And then we can invest in them. Then we have time. But we'll always have a sense that we have no time as long as we're managing it as a crisis.
Yeah, I think that's so key. And you call it the renewal phase now. You know, we're out of crisis, and clearly leaders need to redefine the vision for the organisation, you know, the mission for the organisation, and try and get you know, people on board and excited, you know, about that again and what part they play. So my question with that would be, you know, in adaptability and with sort of redefining vision, mission, getting everyone on board with that, you know, the data that you share with me around how exhausted people are in Australia after this heightened level of change. No one's lived through a global pandemic. You know, I think there's been shock, there's been fear, there's been people scared and still are. You know, how can they, from a mindset point of view, you know, have that curiosity around adapting and coming up with new ideas when they're so tired and exhausted?
Yeah, you're right. So this is actually, and I'm happy to share with people after some recent ABS data. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics have done a great job actually of providing kind of pulse surveys throughout the pandemic. You can access them all at, I think it's ABS /COVID-19, I think is the URL. What that showed at the last pulse survey was that around up to 1 in 2 people in the population, in the working age population, so 18 to 65, were experiencing high levels of anxiety-like symptoms plus high levels of depression-like symptoms. So what we would normally find, and certainly through COVID-19, in the change phase, people get quite anxious and worried. And then once that anxiousness and worry goes, the energy drops away and you find more depression, like low energy sorts of symptoms. What we're finding now is, as we're coming out of that phase, is people are going back into anxiousness, but they're also really tired. And so what that really reveals is at a population level, about 1 in 2 people are really close to burnout. So if you've got low energy and high anxiety, the little energy that you've got is spent on worry, not solving problems. And so if you take that and let's say you're an organization, let's say you're better than most, you're probably still looking at least 25 to 30% of your working workforce like that. Now, that's not necessarily work related. There are people who are, got young kids at home who are sick waiting for a COVID-19 test like me at the moment. You're got people worried about family members. They might have people overseas, family members overseas that are in real dire straits. So people are in this cognitive overload. And as we come out of that renewal phase, that's where we need to build organizational well-being strategies that are measurable so that we can design the right interventions to support our people and remove a lot of that cognitive strain because it is underlying in how people turn up to work. And to your point, if you're at cognitive overload, if you're at high levels of stress for extended periods of time, what we know is that your brain doesn't function well, that you become hard to remember, hard to stay motivated. All the things we value in our workforce become harder, and we need to have strategies to help them move through that because this will be our reality for some time to come.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, people are realizing that having a healthy body and a healthy mind, is part of survival. Like everyone, businesses have been trying to survive this year and continue to do so. Individuals are, we've just got to survive this. And it's like trying to go from survival through to sort of thriving because, back in March, there was definitely some real doomsday mentalities. This is it, everything's going to be over. So people not spending money, businesses not spending money, and we can't predict what's in the future. So almost putting a halt on everything to see what happens. But the thing is, we've got to move through it, don't we? We've got to move through it to keep, as human beings, to get into, thriving and in recovery mode, and for the economy to continue to move.
Absolutely. And that's, if you take that desert analogy, that's the challenge of survival in a desert, right? That there is a great opportunity to thrive, and it's just not going to be open to everyone evenly. So what we know is that we are in a global stress crisis, right? So all your competitors are in the same boat that you are, where their people are dealing with all the same challenges that your people are dealing with. And then your question, what will give you your competitive advantage? What will enable your people and your business to thrive through this is the extent to which you see this now as a competitive advantage business strategy. If you can help your people manage this better, say 20 or 30% better, what will result is their cognitive energy will go up. They'll be able to focus on adaptability. They'll be able to do all the things that we need them to do. But it's likely that a large number of your competitors just won't be able to do that. So this is really where we're now seeing it. As I said, if you go right back to the start of well-being is your pathway to high performance.
Yes.
If everyone is under enormous cognitive strain, the businesses that best manage removing that and managing that cognitive strain right across their workforce will be the ones that will be best able to take advantage of the opportunities that emerge as we go through the various stages.
Yeah. And I think everyone realises that themselves as an individual have to be accountable for getting, looking at themselves, understanding what does, good well-being look like for themselves as well, and what they do outside of work in terms of their personal interests and their hobbies and who they hang out with, doing all those good things that nurture good health and well-being so that, you're at least at the right entry point for the business to take you forward, I think. So
absolutely.
To some Q&A. So the first question, we had so many already come through, is how sustainable is working from home in the long term? We are at our core social beings who like to interact with one another, majority of us at least, and working from home alone can get mentally exhausting. Also for innovation, for businesses, mingling of ideas, brainstorming, banter, conversations, it's not clear that working from home can deliver breakthrough in innovation.
Yeah, so they're really great points. So what would we see that working in what I would call distributed locations? So one of the mindsets that we need to free ourselves up on is the idea that I'll work from office or I'll work from home, right? The way to think about this is in an ongoing way, we want all our people to work from the location where they are safest and most productive.
Yeah.
Right. And what we then need to think about as an organization is what would that look like relative to the external conditions? And as leaders, we can't be lazy and say, well, if everyone's in the same location, I just need to manage that, right? Which was kind of the old model. What we need to do now is start designing our business to enable performance by people working in distributed locations, and understand what is the type of performance that we need them to be great at, and what is the environment where that's likely to happen. So the underlying that question is right, that if everyone is just working independently, we're going to miss generative productivity. So productivity that happens simply by bumping into each other, or, if you see this with young people, most of their learning is actually learning off colleagues and watching. If they're in a computer, they don't ever have that opportunity to come out of a meeting with the CEO where the CEO thinks they're a genius and clearly communicating everything, and they say to a colleague, what the hell was all that about? And their colleague gives them the real answer. So we're missing all that generative productivity at the moment. So as businesses move into renewal phase, part of the planning is not how do we plan to go back to the office, but how do we design our business to operate in new business models that take advantage of multiple locations and multiple environments? What is the technology that will emerge to support that? What is the thinking and the training and org development that's there? And so if we think about this as a freeing structure, the risk for business leaders who spend most of their career in an office is that they yearn to get back to the office because that's what makes them feel secure, and they actually miss the opportunity that they can design the same outcomes. And again, I come back to this as a measurement framework. Design the outcome that you want to see and start running experiments of how would we do that in different ways. It may be bringing people back into the office for team planning. It may be, as I've seen, and helped some teams where they've all gone on a paired walk in a park because of social distancing, and they've taken photographs and they've done their strategic planning while moving, because it's not safe to go back in the office. And their response was it was one of the best, most creative team planning sessions we've ever run. But it meant as leaders we had to think differently about how we design the inputs to get the outcome that we want.
That's right. Yeah, so definitely some elements of where you can and how you can bringing people together. But I think specifically around the innovation and the strategic planning, rather than just the doing your tasks, which clearly people can seem to do very, very well, in their own environment. Absolutely right. And what about, behavioural noticeable, when we're noticing behavioural changes in team members, for those who are having to and not choosing to work remotely and living alone, any tips to support them combating isolation, loneliness, mood issues?
Yeah, look, I think this is a great one. So what I would recommend to people in terms of identifying kind of emerging challenges related to mental health and stress is, rather than ask, are you okay, or how are you feeling, is actually to set a consistent structure which says, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst you could feel and 10 is the best, what's your number? Now, what we know is that people answer that question pretty consistently. So if someone says my number's 3 or below, we know that they're really close to kind of cognitive breakdown, right? They haven't got enough kind of in reserve to really manage a lot of tasks. And our challenge then is, how do we immediately help them practically through support, but remove workload, give them the mental space to kind of get up. If people are 4 or 5, what they generally say is something needs to change. I'm under strain, but I'm coping. But I'm certainly not happy. If someone is 6 or above, 6, 7, 8 and above, then they're doing pretty well. That means that they've got cognitive reserves. So what we want on average in our workforce is for most of the people, most of the time, to be 6 or above. And what it also means as a manager, even in a distributed work environment, I can say, what's your number? And let's say they say it's a 4, then your question is, what are the strategies? What are some things I can do that can help you get to a 6? If they're a 6 or a 7, what are the strategies that are working for you that we need to kind of bake in to keep you at 6, 7 or above? So one of the things for me about helping different people cope and we've seen this through the data, is there are some real obvious people at risk. So people living by themselves, particularly in the extended lockdown in Melbourne, people with young children, homeschooling. But there's actually a lot of hidden vulnerability around cognitive strain. We know women are taking a lot more of the domestic workload during COVID-19 more than men, so they're carrying a lot of that cognitive load as well. We know young people are really missing out on a lot of life milestones and the social occasions. So one of the things I would just really caution is that there are almost everyone at some point in this pandemic is facing cognitive overload. And if we don't have a safe way to talk about it, we then can't dynamically intervene as leaders. And the safe way to talk about it for me is always using numbers, because it means that person can control their story. They don't need to tell you that they're really worried about their elderly father with dementia. That what they need to do is, what they need your help with is, what do I do to solve this problem in a work context? And if we then focus on strategies, even in a distributed work environment, we can actually do pretty well. So that would be my overarching thing. It's a really simple technique, it's a safe technique, and it's one that you can use in a really positive way with teams.
Thank you. And I think, you know, being able to help them solve work problems is you know, what leaders or mentors are used to. But could you give a couple of examples around what some of those strategies might be if someone says, you know, I'm a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, you know, I've got this problem, I need to solve it, you know, and that part you can help them solve. But what could be some other strategies that you can suggest to them to help lift them from a 4 up to that 6 and beyond?
Yeah, so the framework that I'd use for leaders is know the context, know the person, ask the question, right? So what's the context in which they're finding themselves in? Is it too much work? Is it the business is changing a lot? A whole range of things. So what do I know generally about the environment that might be impacting on them? Know the person. If you're connected enough with your team members, you know something about them, and they and certainly if you create a psychologically safe environment, people will naturally disclose, because we become connected to people by disclosing vulnerabilities. So if you don't know a lot of things about the people you work with, that gives you a really good sense as a leader that your people don't trust you, right? Because we are vulnerable to people we trust. So once you then know that, you say, actually, I pretty well know also that this is a person whose family members are from overseas, who's also got a young family and are probably pretty isolated. So I now know some things about what is the work context, or what's the context they find themselves in, what's the vulnerabilities. And then the final part would be, you ask the question, you know, hey, these are some things that might be going on, but what are some other things that are going on? What are some strategies that we can work in? Because what we know is that if you can narrow it down, so you're not just asking asking them to solve every problem. If you're contributing to the problem solution but enabling them to participate, then you'll always come up with 3 to 4 ways in which they can address the issue. And then it's a matter of support and monitoring, like all things in management. Identify the issues, identify a time frame, and that may be as simple as, actually, that person just needs a couple of days off and needs to regenerate and come back.
Yeah.
How can we adjust?
Thank you. Yeah. And you touched on something there which I think is incredibly important now more than ever, but that is the importance of trust within an organisation, you know, and that during this time, the one thing that everyone can cling to is trusting each other that you're doing the right thing as best you possibly can. I mean, how do you think trust can continue to be developed when things are changing so rapidly?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're right. In this era of distributed work environments and high change, trust is our best strategy to enable people to adapt. So if you think about it, you know, the management role was really about generated for compliance, right? So it was really about ensuring that the certainty that the business provided is being executed by you, the employee, right? So one of the things I think organizations are going to really rethink is, what's the role of the manager? Is their job to manage certainty, or is their job to motivate and get the best out of people? And what's the right balance between those two things? Because both will be needed. So that'll be, I think, one of the really big questions, because if your job is to manage and supervise, distributed work environments are quite hard. If your job is to motivate, engage, and help people adapt, then your strategy will be, how do I build trust? What are the things I need to do? And the way in which we psychologically build trust is through the exchange of vulnerabilities. So if I tell you something about myself, if I expose my vulnerabilities to you and you respond positively, we're now building trust. If you don't respond positively, that trust diminishes. And the lesson I learn out of that is, don't do that again. Don't be vulnerable.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things that we're finding in terms of our people leaders to develop in them is be very deliberate about the psychological strategies to build trust in the team. Because what we know is that when we build trust in teams, people want to contribute in a highly changed environment. And so that is therefore our best strategy performance. So rather than the person's not say anything in the room because they're fearful that they'll get embarrassed in front of their boss, they're willing to take an emotional risk to contribute what could be a game-changing idea for your business. And that your job as a leader, people leader or senior leader, is to nurture that environment for contribution across your organization. And that's really the core of building psychological safety. And trust is the key driver of that.
And I can see why, values and cultural fit and all of those things are being tested now for all organisations around the leader needs to feel trust with their teams, who are all working remotely and trusting they're doing the right thing. The teams need to know that the leaders are making the right decision on the best of their behalf. So it's the constant one that's tested and the most important, I think, for everyone, from the leader and the team down.
Absolutely. And this was actually one of the lessons we learned out of the GFC. Actually, if you look at social cohesion in the first years of the GFC, it actually went up as people really responded to shared sacrifice, right? What we found, though, is when the benefits accrued after that shared sacrifice, those benefits were not redistributed evenly, right? And so that's when trust plummets. So we've already seen this in some organisations that have been in the media recently. We're in the first stage of the pandemic. A lot of organisations reached out to their staff and asked for shared sacrifice. Can you reduce your leave loading? Can you take a salary reduction? Can you reduce your hours? And people instinctively responded really positively there.
Yes.
The businesses that are not doing well, and I think will really struggle through the next stage of the pandemic, are not returning that trust through shared benefit. So they ask for shared sacrifice, but they accrue benefit to a small group. And the way in which that's done is through profits or whatever. So the businesses I advise, and EY has been very public about this, is a great example. They asked for some shared sacrifice. They performed really well through to the end of financial year, and then they responded with shared benefit. They gave their people a bonus. They recognised that some people took leave at the wrong time. They gave some of that leave back, and people just then went, actually, that now I trust you. That next time there's an opportunity for you to ask for sacrifice, if I know at the other end when that sacrifice is generates good results, I know that you will give that back to me. And I think that's the big lesson I would say for businesses. If you do have an opportunity where the environment's changed and you've accrued some benefit, don't hoard that benefit. Make sure you give it back to the people who've helped you generate it. And I think that'll be our big challenge as a community as we move through the next phase.
Amazing advice. Thank you. Okay, let me see. Other questions have 5 more minutes. What about any advice that you would give to the individual employees in terms of how they can influence and shape a really healthy workplace and culture, to help develop positive psychological trends, rather than it coming just from a leadership framework?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I wouldn't be too worried about the environment around you. I'd think about it, how do you live your best life? And one of those best lives is how do you develop your own self through work? So if you think about it, what do you need to do as an employee that demonstrates where you think the leaders need to be? without demanding that they respond. So the strategy that I use here in terms of my background in counselling is you can either steer the tanker or you can be the lighthouse, right? And if you're not a leader, realistically, you don't have a lot of influence to steer the tanker. What you can do is be the lighthouse. You can show a different way. You can do that with high integrity. And look, to be honest, some ships will still hit the rocks, right? If they ignore that. And that's a good sign that this may not be the right place for you.
Yes.
But what you'll find is a lot of leaders will respond really well to that lighthouse. They're looking for their people, and they see that as leadership qualities. And so if you're the lighthouse, if you think about living your life with integrity, if you think about putting these own strategies in place and integrating your personal well-being with the organization's well-being, and you're working with great people, then what you should see is that they'll respond to that lighthouse and start changing direction, and give you the opportunities to contribute.
Yeah, love that. So good. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Anything else that you would like to sort of to say in summary, Jono, or to share at this point?
Well, I think I come right back to the beginning that we're really through phase one of the pandemic. We know we're through the shock, we're through the crisis. If you're a leader or your organisation still thinking about this in crisis terms, you need to move on really quickly, because this is now our permanent reality. And the question, once we get out of into that mindset, is how do we live our best lives? How do organisations live their best purpose within this new reality? And how do we start and continue to engage our people through that? If we see that the pathway to solve those problems are we need our people to be engaged and have the cognitive space to do that, planning and participation will be the real challenge, probably, I think, to the end of financial year, certainly over the next 2 quarters. And then the key part of that, I think, for I'm sure many people on the call are on this because they really care about their people. The biggest mistake that I see businesses doing is they're chucking the kitchen sink at wellbeing strategies, but not measuring any of the value. So there's no point running endless workshops, doing lots of training, doing all these sorts of things. If you're not clear on why you're doing it, you're not building a measurement framework that relates to performance. And once you do that, you can start building the right sorts of tent poles to navigate this, not only in the next 3 months, but in the next 3 years plus.
Thank you so much. Honestly, Jono, I learn so much from our conversations. I feel like it's just me and you again, but I'm speaking on behalf of everyone that's attended today. That you know, such amazing insights, and thank you for the brilliant work that you do and giving up your time to share the information this morning. For anyone who's interested in finding out more, when I send out the slides and the follow-up, feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in me connecting you to Jono at the Wellbeing Outfit, or indeed if you've got any questions around, you know, your development plans and talent plans, then feel free to reach out and ask me. But once again, Jono, thank you very much indeed. Good luck with Abacus's COVID test. I hope the results come back soon. And yeah, you know, it's been great to see him as always. Thank you very much.